So today we're going to be looking at these key principles, and you may be familiar with some of them, but obviously not everybody will be. And to do this, what we'll be doing is we're going to be basing ourselves really, and you may be familiar, of course, with the Earth Charter, which emerged in the year 2000 after a long process of international consultation that led to the original Millennium Development Goals, which of course now have been superseded in 2015 by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which have gone from the 8 of the MDGs, or the Millennium Development Goals, to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll check in with these in a minute. But this is probably the motto that I would like to sort of promote, as if we can keep this as an inspiring concept of who we are and where we're going, why this work is important, how whatever we do and wherever we are, can we use this to make a real difference in an impact in the lives of those people around us and in our work. So I've already gone through some of these, and this is posted, so this would always be as a reading. The idea that you'll be developing your leadership style, that you have a good ground in these principles, that you'll be able to apply these principles to your work, and that you will have the knowledge and the skills to design, lead, and manage regenerative projects which are successful in your organizations and in your communities as you go forward. I have found before that some people come to the course with a very clear idea of what they want to do, and so they can get the project outline, which I'll be sharing with you, and they run with it and they find it quite simple. Other people have no idea where they are, but they do know that they want to do something different. They're highly dissatisfied with what they're doing, and that's fine. Wherever you are, I will work with you individually to make sure that you can create the project that you would like to bring to life and implement wherever you are. So feel free to email me at any time with any outlines and any ideas, and we can discuss them. And if necessary, we can get on Zoom or Skype or the phone and discuss. So I was just saying, one of these two is required for the course. I would recommend that you do both. This is the development of your personal leadership sustainability plan, or regenerative leader plan, which then of course is fundamental to developing not just a project, but actually how do you implement the project. If you don't know who you are, you can't actually change your behaviors to create impact. So I would highly recommend this one, and obviously require the project. However, those of you who cannot come up with a project over the course of the 4 weeks, I always give some extension, probably 2 to 3 weeks after the course for you to finish. Then you can use the plan, the personal development action plan, as your required assignment for the course, so that you can get the certificate and then qualify, if you're in the diploma, to go on for the diploma. If you're not interested in the diploma, then none of these are required. So the other assignments, as I mentioned, are the weekly forum and the weekly journal. The journal, of course, comes only to me, so that you can be as private as you wish. The forum, of course, is this opportunity for you to interact with everybody else. So it's not only the interaction with me as the instructor for the course, which obviously enriches the experience for everybody. So I'd recommend that. So very briefly, a question. Think about this. What is the biggest problem or the most important challenge your community is facing today? So that's a question for you to think about. And what you can do is, in the chat box here, in wherever that is, here. In the chat box, you can actually answer that question briefly, if you want to, and if not, we'll just carry on. So think about that, and you just place your answer in the chat box, and I'll pick those answers up, and we can talk about those. And I'll then reference why, how we answer this question is so important. In the meantime, here are some quick facts. This is what we call the Great Acceleration. Over the past 50, 60, 70 years, this has been the acceleration since 1950, so now going back almost 70 years, of the human impact on the planet. In every aspect of our lives, every human system, every individual behavior, because of overpopulation, and now we're close to 7.5 billion, this is the pressure we are putting on the planet today. So it's an interesting diagram or visual to give us an idea as to how quickly we are consuming the resources of the planet and how we are affecting things like the accumulation of waste, which we'll get into. So how do we define these terms? So some people use sustainability and sustainable development interchangeably as if they were the same thing, but they're not really. And so here we have sustainable development, which we call a process of this continuous innovation, improvement, change towards sustainability. Well, sustainability is the end result. So sustainability is the goal, and even not necessarily the most satisfactory goal, but that is the goal, that if we continue working towards that by using sustainable development, which is why we use it for this course, we get the process leading to the result. So as you go thinking of yourself and your project, what you need to engage in is in the process. How do I do something to accomplish this result? And of course, this all began in 1987, when for the first time the United Nations adopted this idea of sustainable development. We'd had the idea of environmental sustainability for many, many years, since the beginning of the 20th century and even bit further back, but it only comes up in what we call the Gruntland Report, where we define, you may have seen this, definition of sustainable development as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Which brings to the public attention for the first time the concept of needs of particularly those who are poor. So it's not just about the natural environment, but about creating a life of opportunity and access to everybody on the planet, and that this is a priority. The other idea is the idea that our technology and the way we organize ourselves, it has limitations in order to meet these present and future needs. We need to rethink everything we do. And this is the topic we'll be addressing next week when I get into the regenerative leadership framework. And of course, you have the links to all of these documents here, which you can research later. So sustainability is defined quite often in two ways. This is what we call the triple bottom line, which was coined by John Elkington many years ago, in 1994, an English professor and economist who is an advisor to the World Economic Forum at Davos. And he coined this idea of the inexorable connection and overlap between nature, economics, and the social environment. These three components must be considered in order for us to think about how we can become a sustainable society. More recently, people like Peter Senge have actually looked at this model and created a nested model where the economy is at the heart of everything we do. It's the engine that runs society, and society is around or envelops the economy. And of course, we are all situated within the natural environment, the planet, the air, the water, the land, which obviously, if the environment is not preserved, this cannot survive, and the economy obviously will not work, which going back to the triple bottom line. And this is one of the problems with people who want to do social work. Very often, poverty trumps the environment. And so therefore, when you have severe poverty, we cannot consider the natural environment or respect it. We must help people survive. And what happens when we do this is we create what we call the double bottom line, where if you're thinking of helping people become economically viable and prosperous in society, you can create an equitable environment. But if you ignore the natural environment, of course, the degradation here is going to lead to everybody suffering in the end. Same thing happens if you just try to do something which balances nature and society, but don't think about the economics, then the end result long term is probably going to be impoverishment and not flourishing and a dynamic, thriving economy, etc., etc. So these are things to think about. In my case, I've tried to go beyond it, and with my research with successful leaders of organizations that are getting to sustainability, companies like Nike, non-profit organizations in micro-lending or microfinance in Guatemala, other social projects in India, in Africa, in other places of the world, what we see is that there is something more than sustainability. And that there is a prior piece of the work, which is in regeneration, to be able to restore the damage, to heal the damage caused by human activity on natural, social, and economic systems, while at the same time securing lasting, desirable futures for all living beings through the design of integrated approaches that lead to resilient, thriving, and life-affirming organizations, communities, regions, and the world. And we call this the triple top line rather than the triple bottom line. And to answer the question about which is the greatest problem that you see, the greatest problem, or the underlying problem to the challenge you see in the community, is human consciousness and ignorance. Mm-hmm. We tend to focus on behaviors. We tend to focus on the things we do, but not on the underlying problem, which is no other species on the planet damages the ecosystem. It is only human beings. And until we understand that and focus first on human consciousness and why we do what we do, we're not going to change our behaviors, obviously, in any significant way. And this is the challenge, because many people don't want to go there. It's not something we focus on. And we'll be doing much more work on that next week. So the vision for regenerative leadership, which is this idea of the desirable future, is to go beyond sustainability to regeneration, from the triple bottom line to the triple top line. And the triple bottom line, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's become very technical, where engineers and people working in the sustainability accountability field, they've gone into controlling the environmental, social, and economic factors using spreadsheets and data and quantitative information to see how they can reduce their risks and their costs, and we'll be talking about that later, in order to generate more profit. But that's removed the vision, it's removed the reason why, and it's become a technical and sometimes a very wearing, a very tiring approach, and a very less meaningful approach to sustainability. Whereas the triple top line is captured in a very, very simple phrase, which is this: how can we grow prosperity, celebrate community, and enhance the health of all species for all time? If each of you can answer that question for yourself in the work that you do, then you will have created your own legacy going forward. And if you can keep this vision in mind, even when you get into the technicalities of sustainability, accountability, measuring, quantitative data, things that are necessary and useful, but they are not the solution. They're only an indicator. So, one of the first most important things about regenerative leaders versus sustainability leaders is how we express ourselves. In the sustainability field, very often we talk about all of these terms. We are responsible, we must do something. It's about the organization, what should be done and who should do it. We talk about limits and scarcity. We talk about these very abstract global issues like climate change. We talk about respecting each other and the planet. We talk about hope, and all of these terms, and this comes through in the terminology and the language used by people like Al Gore, where we drive people through appealing to their sense of responsibility or even guilt or a moral obligation. As a regenerative leader, if you're really going to have an impact, I would suggest, and this is what I've seen in my research, that we change the tone and the language. We need to inspire people to want to do something, which is why you come to this course and this program, presumably. What are the opportunities out there? So rather than looking at problems, which I asked you about before, what are the opportunities that you have or that we have to make a difference? And it's not about the organization, it's personal. What can I do to make a difference? not about the limits. Oh, we have to hurry because we're going to reach the end of the line and we're going to die. So no, what are the possibilities out there? How can we turn the situation to an advantage rather than try to force some sort of solution to a small problem that normally creates more problems as we actually create this new solution? Do we have that passion? And we'll be talking more about that later. For a local issue, not the global issue. We cannot solve the global issue without solving things at the local level. And can we go from respect to love? Can we actually love what we do, love ourselves, and love one another? That will generate much more positive momentum going forward. And can we believe in people to do this? Or have we lost faith in ourselves and others? Because if we don't have faith in people, then hope for the planet is just not going to cut it. We're not going to make it. And I hope that makes sense. I'll take your questions later. Okay? So I'm just trying to get through this so that we have the recording. So some of the frameworks that are very important, and again, you can check the links later. Karl-Henrik Robert is an oncologist, a cancer scientist in Sweden. And he actually, in the late 1980s, 1990, he was very concerned about why people were developing cancer in certain regions of the country. And he began to believe that there might be some sort of environmental cause to that. So he created this very wide consultation process of surveys of many people in that community, that society. And with the responses he received on his survey, he came up with 4 key principles of how we need to create a sustainable society. And this is what he called the natural step. This is one of the key frameworks that people use in for-profit, not-for-profit, and governmental agencies to see what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so these are the 4 conditions that we must respect and comply with if we're going to create a sustainable society. So he says, in a sustainable society, nature must not be subjected to systematically increasing our human impact in these things. Number 1, concentrations of substances from the Earth's crust. And I'll go through these very quickly, and then you can do more research. Concentration of substances produced by society, such as antibiotics, which are disrupting the biosphere, the health and the balance of natural species, and endocrine disruptors. And these are things like female hormones, antibiotics, all of these kinds of chemical products that we use, and that might be interesting to, I think, was it Sylvia?
Yes.
In terms of what do you do as a chemist to actually create substances that are poisoning the earth and the species in it. Also, we cannot continue to degrade the planet by physical means, deforestation, changing the course of rivers, eliminating mountains, all sorts of things that we do physical means. And finally, that we can no longer continue to place obstacles in the face of people's prosperity. We should not impact people's health and their ability to access work, access to education, to health services, to empowering women. And so these are 4 of the conditions that come from the natural step. So I've created this fractal. Are you familiar with fractals? And if you're not, a fractal is this concept. It's a mathematical or a geometric concept that everything in the universe is actually replicated as a model from the very small to the very large. So from the atom through to a galaxy, everything operates on the same mathematical principles, and these are repeated across the universe. Hurricanes, galaxies move in the same way, how water circulates, how fruit and flowers are actually designed. These are all repeated in these patterns. So here we have that particular pattern, which goes from the macro, the large, to the small. And the intent here is to look at the triple bottom line in these 3 key principles, and how, as we begin to integrate the 3, we can get closer and closer to what I call the sweet spot of sustainability. So again, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but that's the key principle. Everybody who works in these three spaces has a key question that they ask. Ecologists, environmentalists ask, are we obeying nature's laws? And they answer that by actually measuring life cycle assessments. These are different techniques, designing for the environment. They look at industrial ecology. They look at the management of resources. So these are the major themes that actually look at a single bottom line. When we look at social justice and equity, the question people ask is, do people respect one another? So when we look at syndicates and unions and labor, the themes are social justice. We have issues with free trade and exploitation. We have union management, which is confrontational. Of course, when we look at economics, the question is, can I provide my product or service at a profit? And so if I ignore the others, then my concerns are economism, which goes back to free trade and a free market, that everything is about money. Obviously, we have to go back to Marx and Engels and the Communist Manifesto and social democracies versus free market capitalism, and managing shareholders, which is the corporate approach to how to share wealth. We have shareholders invest, and we must serve our shareholders. So what happens when we begin to integrate? If we can get a business person to ask a question that considers the environment, is our ecological strategy profitable, is a question that a business person would ask when they begin to see the impact of their industry or their business, and can we improve that? Because things are getting far more public as well, and the consequences of not being ecological or ecologically friendly are beginning to have an impact on our profit. So we start to go from the principle of the cradle to the grave, which is the linear model of extracting natural resources, turning them into stuff, selling it to people, and then all of this going into the landfill, into becoming part of the waste stream. That's cradle to grave. The next step up is, can we begin to reduce, reuse, recycle, which is what we do in schools, for example, and Anna might be interested in this, but we don't get beyond this sort of eco-efficiency. And we don't get into, well, why should we have waste in the first place? We should not be needing to recycle. Why should we reduce? Shouldn't everything we use be a noble product that we can use again and again and again and turn back into a new product that's just as good as the one before? Which gets us to the greening of business, where we really become very much more transparent. We actually purchase, everything comes from sustainable forests in terms of our paper. We recycle our ink from our printers. Our transportation system has zero impact on carbon emissions. We look at how we fly. We no longer take airplanes that are not sustainable, or we have Zoom meetings like this so that people don't travel. All of these principles start coming into our business model. Eventually, we can get to cradle, which is the opposite of cradle to grave, which is where everything we extract, we can retransform into a new product or a new service that has had zero impact on the environment, but even might improve the environment, which is one of the key principles emerging today from business and industry. This is what we call the industrial re-evolution, going forward and creating this completely new industrial stream, which we can talk about later, which takes us to the eco-effectiveness rather than efficiency, and upcycling, where the new products and services are actually better than the ones we had before, using the same chemical principles. Another thing that Sylvia might be interested in. So as we move on, if an ecologist and people who are into the social justice space ask a question that incorporates the two, how does this product or this service going to affect future generations? And can we bring business in here as well? Today, the concern is very often just to reduce exposure and risk. We try to improve the quality of the paint that we use in our buildings. We try to reduce the amount of toxins in our products, in our cleaning products, both for ourselves and for the environment. But we don't look into things like the aesthetic design of where we live and where we work. Can we create sustainable buildings that are also beautiful? And can we live in things that are aesthetically pleasing? And eventually, can we get into I would say a mindset and a behavior that actually promotes health and well-being wherever we are, in the workplace. And this is both social well-being, so we're talking about psychological, emotional, as well as physical and environmental. And of course, when we look at the economy, the business people and equity, when we try to balance these agendas together, we look at, are men and women paid fairly and equally, which of course is now one of the big conversations going on around the planet. And we begin to look at corporate social responsibility that you may be familiar with. We look at fair trade rather than free trade. We look at inclusion and diversity. We look at the celebration of multiple cultures, which we all work in today. We look at fair wages for all. And instead of shareholder management, we look at stakeholder management, which is everybody, which brings in the concept not just of who invests in us, but how do we affect our clients, our customers, and also those people who are not directly related to us, which is what we call externalities. Those people outside of our industrial or our business or our community service loop who are still affected positively or negatively by what we do, which is what we call stakeholder management. If we can integrate all three, that's where we get to this sweet spot of sustainability. I know it's a lot of complicated stuff, but as you go reading the materials in the course, some of these will become clear. And if you have questions, just email me and I'll be glad to discuss any of these topics with you. So moving along. Here are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You may be familiar with them. And if you're not, here they are. Here's the link to them. You can get into, you will see how from 8, they've actually broken these down into 17. And the project that you're going to be doing, whatever the difference you want to make, you can always tie that back to one of these 17 or more than one. Oops, sorry. So do you want to look at gender equality and empower women and girls? Do you want to end hunger? Do you want to end poverty? Do you want to provide an inclusive quality education for all, even in a private school? How do you do that? If you want to look at health and well-being for all. So all of these, if you want to get into agriculture, the built environment, look at the ocean. Those of us who live near the coastline, we have sea level rise. These are all different topics that if you apply a regenerative perspective, you can actually see how that comes right back into your backyard, where you can do something small and then scale that up into your project. And the 5 Ps of the, shall we say, the theme of the Sustainable Development Goals is to develop people, planet, prosperity, peace, and through partnership. And these hope to be accomplished by 2030, which is very ambitious. But hopefully we'll be getting closer and closer to providing what the Brundtland report in 1997 said, to be able to create development that provides for the needs of the present generations and doesn't compromise the ability of future generations to satisfy their own needs, so they can live as sustainably or as prosperously or fulfilling lives with access to freedom and education and health as we do, and more so. So here I have some local resources here for Southeast Florida that look into things like sea level rise, look into what we call the Southeast Florida Climate Compact, which is one of the first in the world, one of the first coordinated efforts across different district or county lines. Here are 5 counties in Southeast Florida to actually have an impact on everything having to do with the natural environment, the social and the economic environment, and society as a whole, including vulnerable populations, those who don't have a voice at the table. The Sea Level Rise is an actual app that if you click here, you can put in your zip code or your address, hopefully anywhere in the world, and that will tell you your elevation above sea level to see how vulnerable you may be to sea level rise, which of course is important to us. So you need to figure out what is important to you.